Welcome everyone to episode 22 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. This is a fishing podcast where we talk about average things, average skills, and average fish. And above average content, hopefully.
And below average looks.
Yep, it happens. This episode is pretty cool. I'm really excited about it. It's all about flipping, pitching, and punching, which is one of my favorite things to do for largemouth bass. We're going to be talking mostly about fishing heavy cover and flipping, pitching, and punching, which are really fun to do, right, Andrew? I just got Andrew hooked on it a few years ago.
Yeah, so it's more exciting than I thought it would be. Like, I'm just dunking soft plastic. Like, this is amazing.
Yeah. So before we get into that, though, we do have an interesting fishing fact brought to you by the one and only man with a mustache, Andrew.
No one else has mustaches, just me.
Yeah.
Sorry, Seth Fighter. So, dangerous fish in our Great Lakes.
Ooh.
So there was reports about and sightings about a shark in Lake Ontario, which turned out to be a promotion for Shark Week.
Oh, okay. Makes sense.
So sharks, I looked up, unfortunately, contrary to what I thought potentially could happen, bull sharks can't survive in the cold water, so sharks in the Great Lakes aren't going to happen. And the sharks that could get potentially through from the St. Lawrence has to go down the Niagara Falls, survive that, and also they don't survive in fresh water. So sharks are no-go. But there are still dangerous fish and invasive fish in our waters. What do you think I'm going to talk about?
I have no idea.
Yeah, you absolutely do not for this one.
Grass carp.
They're dangerous as well. Big danger, but no, not this type of danger.
Go ahead.
So they are called the ball nipper.
Ew.
They are a testicle nipping fish. They're called the pacu. It's from the Amazon River in South America.
That's terrifying.
Yeah. So you may have heard of them before. They are in the piranha family. However, they don't have the sharp teeth. They have human-like teeth, which is for some reason creepier.
That is way creepier.
So you may have seen them. There was an episode of River Monsters where he was showing them and describing them as a dangerous fish, kind of as a little excerpt in one of his shows.
Okay.
They primarily feed on seeds and nuts that fall in the water, and they come up and they have these flat, like human-like teeth, and they like start chomping at these seeds and stuff that fall from the bushes alongside the rivers and whatnot. So the reason why we have them in the Great Lakes, now they haven't been caught in Lake Ontario, but they have been caught in Lake St. Clair.
That's pretty close.
Very close. It's right in the part of Ontario. Reason why they're there is because people have them in a tropical fish tank and they grow too big for the tank, and so they don't want to kill it, or they don't want to bother trying to find some place to donate it to or whatnot, so they just release it because they don't want it to die. The issue with that is they don't belong here. Come on, people. So they can actually grow to 90 centimeters, which I don't measure things in centimeters, so that's 35 and a half inches almost. Like that's
huge.
Big. Yeah.
Holy smokes.
And these things, they look like a piranha. Like they have in the red belly pacu, like it looks like a red belly piranha. If you want to visualize it. So the reason why they're called ball nipper is because in Papua New Guinea, there have been 2 deaths that have been attributed to the pacu due to scrotum nipping.
Those are 2 words I never thought I'd hear. I hope we don't get censored for this.
And in Edinburgh, there's a report of eaten fingers by these fish.
Okay, so I'd rather take an eaten finger.
So the thing is, they naturally eat nuts, so it,
not a big leap there.
Yeah. So the thing is, they have very strong jaws. So that when these nuts fall in the water, and this is actual nuts from a tree, they can actually crunch them up, like break them, crack them with their jaws. They're very strong jaws. So if they start nipping just flesh, it will do damage. They can bite fingers off. Like, you do not mess around with these fish. You would treat them exactly like you would a piranha, even though it doesn't have the razor sharp teeth. They'll still take, digits off. So I was wondering how many there are. In the United States, they have been caught in 27 different states. Like, this is the amount of people like releasing them. There's no breeding populations ever found. So these are literally just ones that have been released. But they're a popular tropical fish tank, or a tropical fish to have in a tank. And in 2016, 2 were caught that year in Lake St. Clair, and 1 was caught in the Port Huron area. So it's 3 different ones that were disposed of, that were kept. They weren't like the same fish caught multiple times. These are 3 different fish that were caught in 2016. And on average, it's about every other year they catch another one out of Lake St. Clair. Ugh. So like, when I think Lake St. Clair, I think muskie, right?
Yeah.
Or walleye.
Or smallmouth.
Like,
yeah.
I don't want those things to bite me. I don't want the testicle nipper to like, oh, I'm just going to wade around by the dock here, and all of a sudden I'm talking like this.
That's that's you know what? That's more terrifying than the last episode about mythical creatures. Wow.
So yeah, that's something to watch out for, people. So forget about sharks. Watch out for the pacu,
also known as
the testicle nipper, or the ball nipper.
Oh,
yeah.
I don't want to give you a good rating for that, just because now I don't want to ever go swimming. Although,
well, to sweeten the deal, the higher rating you give me, the less chance you're going to encounter one. A+.
For shock value, I will give you an A+ for that. That's pretty good. A 95%.
It's all about those views, Jesse. Come on.
Yeah. The things Andrew does for a bunch of podcast downloads. So anyway, if you see one of these fish, I urge you to swim frantically the opposite way while covering yourself. So anyway, that was interesting. I don't want to say thank you for that, but thanks. Before we get started in the main topic, we would just like to introduce our episode 22 podcast sponsor of the week. This one is actually our first podcast sponsor that is not from Ontario.
Womp womp.
Yeah, but it's a very cool one.
And now, because of that noise, no one will ever sponsor us away from Ontario again.
No. Well, the thing is, I got referred to this guy from a lot of people in Ontario in the bait making community. And this is a really, really cool giveaway. And I was showing Andrew some of the stuff, and he was just like blown away. It's very cool.
They look really cool.
Yeah. And again, we are pretty picky with who we work with for podcast sponsors. We do turn a lot of people down. Like, there's lots of people who are like, oh, you know, we have this product or this or that. And I'm like, you don't even make it. Like, it's something random. But this is different. This is very cool and unique. So our episode 22 podcast is sponsored by Slim's Lures. It's a bit of a tongue twister.
Slim's Lures.
Slim's Lures.
Slim Lures.
So the owner of Slim's Lures, his name is Noah Clark. And he's actually not from Ontario. He's from West Virginia.
Take me home, Mountain Road. That's wrong. West Virginia, Mountain Mama.
Okay, that's enough. So anyway, Noah's been making custom baits and molds since 2018. So a few years. Nice. And he sent me some information about some of the stuff that he started building. He has unique molds, like I said. And when he made these, it caught the attention of a lot of anglers. So like, we have a lot of bait makers up here, and again, a lot of bait makers, they buy their molds from the same place. Mm-hmm. There's lots of companies that make molds, and they're just proven shapes, and a lot of people make them, and they're all the same. And again, like we said before in the other podcast about Wham Baits, they all put their own spin on the baits, which is great. So, you know, you can support your local bait maker and the way that they make their bait. Now, Noah Clark, on the other hand, he actually makes his own molds. So that's cool. So like, when he pictures a bait in his head, I'm assuming he's like, you know what, I want to do this, I want to do this. And he can do that. If you buy a bait mold just from, you know, the bait mold store or whatever online, you can't custom do it. Like, you can get a custom mold done, but that's literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars, I assume. Because regular bait molds are very expensive.
Where'd you get your bait mold from? The bait mold store?
Yeah. I think it's like baitmolds.com. I don't know. So anyway, so Noah Clark from Slim's Lures, he actually makes his own silicone bait molds, which is very cool.
Silicone. That's
cool.
Cool.
So they're not metal. So like, obviously metal CNC machined molds are very expensive. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking just to get into it or have something very unique and custom, he makes them out of silicone. He offers unique silicone open pore molds that are built to last for the avid angler or someone that has a bait company. Like we know, we're going to get into this, but we know a few bait companies up here that use his molds, and the product that they make is fantastic. So I thought we could just quickly cover, again, we don't make our own baits. we know a little bit about the process just from watching our friends that make them. But what's the difference, Andrew, between an open pour and an injection mold?
Open pour is a lot easier to get into. So essentially you have an open pour bait will always have a flat side because you just pour in from the top and it will your plastic will level against the top. But essentially it's upside down. So its bottom is flat most of the time.
Exactly. So you can literally just melt down plastic and pour it into the mold. And then when it hardens, you pull it out and you're done.
So all you need is a Pyrex dish to melt plastic and this mold, and you can start pouring your own. The injection molds, you need to have an injector. You need the mold clamped, and you have to know what you're doing because it's a bit of a learning curve on those to get the baits to come out good all the time. But it's a lot more upfront cost to get into an injection mold.
Yeah, and
because those tools are specific.
Yeah. So if you were someone that's just looking to get into making, some baits, maybe you sell your own baits, but maybe you're just like, you know what, every year I have this big pile of broken plastics from the summer and I can melt them down and pour them into a mold. That's why you want an open pour, because it's so easy and inexpensive to get into. And you may think, okay, you can't have any complicated molds with an open pour. You can.
The cool thing with these is some open pours you can get, and they are machine steel. Those you can't really do. Again, because it has to come out of a hard mold, you can't have too many extra ligaments or whatnot sometimes on those. But because it's silicone, you can kind of pop it right out.
Yep.
So they can be a lot more detailed on the silicone molds here for being an open pour bait. It can kind of almost wrap around your pour as well.
Exactly. So you may think, oh, it's silicone, it's not going to last. These actually do last.
Yeah.
So, and a few companies that we know up here in Ontario that use Noah's molds is Wham Baits and Limestone Lures. Remember Limestone Lures? He sponsored an episode a few ago, and he had the Goober Goby. Remember that?
Yes.
That's the one that Noah Clark made.
Nice.
So he makes a lot of cool molds. I was showing Andrew a lot of the pictures of some of the molds that he has, and I'll post them on our Instagram throughout the week. They're very intricate.
I'm super impressed with the stuff this guy can produce, these molds.
And this giveaway, we're going to get into it a little bit later, but he's actually giving away 8 molds.
That's 8. You can start your own company with that.
Dude, with these molds, I'm not going to get into them. I'll get into them later of the ones that he's giving, but it's a lot. Like, there's lots of cool baits. Noah was telling me that he makes a lot of his baits finesse baits because he's more interested in getting quantity of fish, like catching more fish than just chucking, big stuff. Mm-hmm. So he's looking to catch big fish and small fish, which I think is that's my goal too. Every time I go out, I want to catch a 12-inch bass as much as a 5-pounder. Obviously I'd like to catch more 5-pounders, but you don't want to use such big baits that you're just completely not catching anything under that weight. So a lot of his baits that he's giving away, they're actually very good finesse baits. And I don't know about the fishing in West Virginia. I've drove through there. It's beautiful. But up here in Ontario, finesse is the name of the game for smallmouth bass fishing. And smallmouth bass fishing is literally what Ontario is known for. So I almost guarantee if you win this and you do some of these molds, you're literally going to have an arsenal of amazing baits to catch a lot of different types of fish, but smallmouth like crazy. Mm-hmm. Smallmouth and largemouth. 100%.
I have a question for you though. When you're driving through West Virginia, what kind of road were you on? Country road.
It wasn't a country road. All I remember is driving down from Ontario through West Virginia, and I was like, this is beautiful.
Oh, so you weren't even on your way home? Come on.
No, I was actually driving down to South Carolina. But I do recall we did stop my first breakfast ever that I ate in America. We stopped at a Bob Evans, which is like a breakfast place in the States, in West Virginia. And after driving all night from Toronto, we got to West Virginia, and as soon as I walked in, it was 6 a.m. They just opened. We had to actually waited in the car until they opened because we drove through the night. And when we walked in, they're just like, how y'all doing? And as soon as they said that, I was like, it's true. The stereotype lives.
And they were some grits.
They were literally the nicest people I've ever met in my life.
Biscuits and gravy.
Yeah. People were holding the door open for my wife, God bless you. Have a good day. Just amazing state.
Yeah.
I love it. I wish maybe one day we'll get to go fishing down there because we drove by some pretty juicy looking lakes. I was like, oh, I wish I could fish.
They have some insane fishing in Virginia.
But anyway, we're going to get into this giveaway a little bit more later. We'd like to thank Noah again for that because literally some of these molds, it's something that I personally probably wouldn't buy molds. I buy baits. I'm not a bait maker.
Yeah.
But if I got some of these molds, I would think about it because they look pretty, like, it looks like something you could actually do. Even if you're not someone that's super creative or anything like that, you could, melt down some old plastics or buy some plastics and do this. And it might be a fun project. And guess what? You could, never buy baits again. Just make your own. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
It sounds like a really expensive hobby to get into. So I don't even want to touch that because I'm poor. But anyway, we're going to get into our main topic, which is flipping, pitching, and punching. You could probably do a topic for each one of those, but summer's almost over. So we're going to do them all at the same time.
So we're cramming.
Oh, we're cramming. So this episode, we're mostly going to talk about heavy cover largemouth. Not to say that you can't flip for smallmouth or flip for muskie or anything. You can flip for any kind of fish, but most of the time, the fish in heavy, thick, shallow cover is largemouth bass. Mm-hmm. That's the way it is. So we're going to talk briefly. What is flipping? What is pitching? What is punching? So why don't you take flipping, like actual flipping? So I know a lot of times, just to start, people say, oh, I'm flipping today, but they're actually pitching. I think a lot of times, like, we just use those two words interchangeably. Mm-hmm. When I say, oh, I'm going to flip a bait under that log, I'm pitching it, but it's just like I'm flipping it out. I'm not referring to actual old school flipping, which Andrew will describe.
So they are, like you said, they are quite similar. But the old flipping was very close proximity to the boat. Yeah. So pitching is you are trying to get more distance. Flipping, they oftentimes didn't even reel in anymore. So you can pull the line off your, right in front of your reel, and you pull off, you get 3 feet of distance. So you got 6 feet of line that you've lifted up on, and you can just like flip it out into the nearest pocket, let go, and it just sinks down into that pocket. Yeah. So you're fishing very close quarters.
You're looking like 10 to 15 feet max.
This is the kind of thing, it's awesome when you're going through, like Jesse said, very heavy cover, and you just like, I'm fishing this hole, this hole, this hole. You're not spooking fish. You're going through super quiet, maybe using a push pole. Maybe you're in a canoe, you're paddling. And as you go along, you see a little pocket that's open on the side of the boat, and you just like drop it in. Yeah. You're fishing within 10 feet.
It's literally, that's the right word to use. You're dropping baits. Yeah. You're dropping baits into holes. And like you said, it's very quiet. You can get to the point where you pitch very well, that you make a very small splash, but flipping, you can literally just gently drop it into the water, which sometimes everyone's like, oh, bass are dumb. They don't care. You can sneak right up on a bass. Yeah. It won't even know you're there. And then gently drop a bait into a hole or beside a log. And that's when you want to flip. Now, it seems like most people don't really flip anymore because pitching is, generally speaking, way more versatile. Yeah. You can short pitch, instead of flipping 10 feet, you can just pitch 10 feet, It isn't as stealthy, but generally I find that bass don't really care. So I mostly just pitch. So talking about pitching, instead of flipping and pulling line off your reel and dropping it in, pitching is just an underhand cast. And generally speaking, you want a low trajectory so that you don't want your lure to fly up in the air and just crash down in the water and make a big splash. You want to keep
that next
as low to the water as you can. You can also do another cast called a pitch skip, which is a little harder, which is when you kind of turn your body and pitch at the same time. Yeah. And keep it really low to the water.
It's almost a side cast as well. But it's still like an underhand.
And it basically will skim across the surface, which is great for like skipping under docks or under trees. But pitching generally is when you're just doing short underhand cast, generally 20, 25, 30 feet at
30
most.
Feet max.
Yeah. And generally you're close quarter fishing. You don't want to cast too far. That's a problem I usually do is I try to pitch too far. And it's like, yes, you can cast that far, but it may not be the best way to get fish hooked or out of the water. Yeah.
Because so, when you're fishing these baits, you're not fishing at top water where the bass is going to come up and you can try and keep his head above water, reeling him in. You're fishing these baits that are sinking down into these holes. You're hooking this bass, potentially 5-pound bass or whatever, 4 feet under thick weeds. And as soon as he picks that up, he's not coming up. He's going across into all these weeds.
Yeah, just wrapping up.
If you're too far away, you are lessening your chances of actually getting that fish through that many weeds.
Yeah. So you literally just want to hook that fish
close,
clock him hard with a good hook set and then get his head up and just drag him on top. Yeah. And we'll talk about the gear you need to do that.
And the further away you are, the less leverage you have to do so.
100%. And it gets significantly harder. And the last technique is called punching, which is basically similar to flipping and pitching, except it's a lot heavier weight. Yeah. So oftentimes you'll be fishing thick matted vegetation. Now in Florida, they have thick hysynth mats and stuff like that. We don't have that in Ontario.
Called like a cheese mat.
Yeah. So you have like thick slop. I always call it slop. Yeah. And sometimes it'll just be just a mix up of crap that's cut up from boat motors that kind of flows into an area. And it'll just be like, chunks of milfoil, chunks of that long stringy
rotting
grass.
leaf liver. Leaf litter, sorry.
Leaf liver?
Tasty.
So generally, punching is when you're fishing extremely thick cover and you need a really heavy weight to punch through that thick vegetation to get to the fish underneath. We're going to get more into each of these techniques and how to do it. So that is what flipping, pitching, punching is. Again, you're probably listening to this podcast. You're probably well aware of this. This is more of an introduction to someone who maybe be getting into fishing or hasn't fished heavy cover or maybe doesn't feel comfortable fishing heavy cover. We're going to give you some of the tips that we've picked up over the years. So why is we kind of covered this a little bit, but why is flipping and pitching? We're just going to say flipping and pitching and punching. Like, why is fishing this techniques? Why is it effective?
It's reaction baits.
Yeah.
So it usually sinks fast to the bottom. These bass, they're not doing it because they're hungry. You get to a bass that has like a distended belly who's just fed up on 4 different frogs in his stomach and basically has food hanging out of his mouth, and all of a sudden something comes down and it's instinct. They're like, oh, I have to hit that, and they'll just like nail it.
Yeah.
So all you're doing is you're trying to locate fish and just drop presentations in front of their faces so they hit it.
So even if fish are being moody, you can incite that reaction. We always say like a reaction is like if I'm holding a baseball and I throw it at Andrew, he'll instinctively catch it. Even if I don't tell him, hey, I'm going to throw a baseball at you.
Yeah. So
this bass is not hungry or maybe in a negative mood, and you throw that baseball at it or the food, it just reacts. It's like, oh, because it's programmed every day just to eat as much food as possible to
They're
survive.
Opportunistic.
So when a bait flies by their face, even if they're not hungry, they have to make that decision in a fraction of a second. And then their animal instinct just takes over and it's like, eat that. So that's why, again, Andrew's first point, the reaction bite, it's a huge point. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't think of when you're fishing around thick cover. Sometimes you need to increase the weight a little bit. Yeah. People are like, oh, I think it's better when the bait slowly falls to the bottom.
I've said before, I really like unweighted plastics.
Yeah.
But there are days when I'm trying to
kills.
fish unweighted plastics and Jesse's destroying me
with a 1 ounce
fishing
sinker.
a 1 ounce sinker.
Yeah.
Like,
so that's a good point. So you really have to see on the day. Again, I'm not saying use a super heavy sinker fishing 1 foot of water, but like you want your bait to fall fast when the fish are aggressive and when you're getting that reaction strike. Sometimes though, flipping a very light Texas rig where it's just slowly slithering down, that can be the deal.
You can flip anything. You can flip Senkos. You can flip an unweighted Senko.
Yeah.
But primarily flipping is often done by using things that have generally a heavier weight because you're fishing heavier cover. You don't want an exposed hook.
Yeah.
You need it to be able to fish where the fish have been pushed into.
Exactly. And I think going off the first point of being a reaction bite, I think the fact that flipping, pitching, and punching is so effective is because you're playing the numbers game. Mm-hmm. And to go back on that, I think one of the main reasons it's so effective is because sometimes you literally only have 2 options of what you can fish in slop: a frog and punching something through it.
Yeah.
You can't throw a crankbait. You can't throw a spinnerbait. You can't throw a chatterbait. Nothing. It's too thick to throw anything. You can't just throw, a lure into the slop and reel it in. You either have to fish on top of it or punch below it.
Yeah.
And when it comes to fishing on top of it, a frog can be a good way to cover water and find fish. But once you find an area where you know there's fish in, sometimes you hear that little kissing noise, like the popping noise on the top. It's like little bluegill noises. You know that area has sunfish in it. You know that area also has bass in it because they eat sunfish or bluegill. So you're playing the numbers game. When you're fishing fast, sometimes when that works, you can hit so many spots. If you're just kind of going through an area and you're just like spot, 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 and you're just flipping it in, as soon as it hits the bottom, wiggle it a few times, pull it out, cast again to another spot. You're literally fishing quickly and effectively. You can cover a huge area of water very quickly. If you're slowly dunking a worm and jiggling it around, if the fish is hungry, he'd already hit it 5 minutes ago. You know what I mean? I love just being able to just fish through quickly and find those active fish. And for me, I like to find active fish. I'd rather cover more water and find active fish than slow down. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to slow down, but it happens. So when it comes to flipping and pitching, we're just going to say that the 2 styles that we're really going to cover today is Texas rig and jig. I'm a huge fan of both. They both have different areas where they excel at. What's your preference if you could only have one?
I like Texas rig just because if I'm fishing heavier cover, I know that a jig has a weed guard, but a Texas rig is just more streamlined and more weedless, especially when I'm pulling it out. Nothing's, I'm pulling out a smaller diameter out of slop than a jig that has kind of almost a frame on it on the front end.
Yep. I do find that when it comes to fishing really heavy weeds, jigs tend to hang up more and bring up more weeds back with them when you're flipping through. You end up pulling more weeds off.
They'll pick up the leaf litter on the bottom.
Yeah.
More so.
I do find though, so Texas rigs generally, they're more weedless and they're more compact generally because there's not a lot of bulk to them. So I find you do get more bites on them. On the other hand, I find that jigs have a bigger profile. So you tend to catch bigger fish on them.
Yeah.
Like remember that day we had last year on Stony? The two biggest fish of the day, one smallmouth, one largemouth. I caught them both on a big, bushy, big jig with a big craw trailer on the back. And we were fishing all kinds of smaller baits. And we were picking off little 12-inch, 14 inches all day. But we didn't catch those 3 or 4 pounders until we started fishing bigger jigs.
Yeah.
And that we're fishing the same spots with the smaller baits. They wouldn't touch it. They just not interested. But as soon as you whip a big jig by them, and maybe it was the reaction of it falling fast, or maybe it was the bulk of, they're being enticed by a bigger meal. Who knows? But jigs tend to get bigger bites. And most people will agree with that. Again, we're not experts, but that's what we have found. So anyway, that's kind of the difference between Texas rig and jig. If I only had to pick one, I'd probably pick a Texas rig just for the versatility of it. But I do find, and I hear this a lot, I hear people say, you know what, I fish a jig, I just don't catch anything on it.
That was me for a very long time.
Yeah. And why did you feel that way?
I didn't have any confidence because when I would try it, I wasn't fishing in the right spots for one.
Yeah.
Because I didn't believe enough in it's weedless or, I'm fishing it on timber. I'm like, this thing is a heavy jig. It's going to get hung up in everything.
Yeah.
So I wasn't fishing it where it was designed to be fished, which is my biggest flaw with it. And the second thing was I was trying to fish it too far away. So I probably got bit a bunch of times in the past.
And just didn't feel it.
Didn't feel it. Didn't know.
And that's a good tip. Like, again, like we said, you're fishing, when you're pitching, you don't have to cast far. Like bass, generally largemouth and shallow cover, you can get pretty much right on top of them. Yeah. Like how many bass have you caught literally right beside the boat? Like you're drifting over a lily pad bed and you're like, oh, I'll just drop it in here. And fish just grabs it. They don't care.
The whole time when we used to fish them out of my canoe, we couldn't stand up.
Yeah.
And because it's pretty tippy. It's a portaging canoe. So as we're paddling around through these, slop, we're casting frogs. But as I'd make Jesse, paddle and I wouldn't be in the back, I'd be dunking my bait as we go along, and literally holes that were passing over, I dunk it behind me, right beside the boat. We were literally on top of these fish, and you could catch fish.
Yeah.
So as long as you have a stealthy approach in your vessel, the bass aren't going to be spooked.
You can get right up on top of them. Yeah. And how many times have you been floating over? Like, I know we fish in smaller boats, but you pretty much drift over and there'll be a bass. You see it and it doesn't even move. And you drift pretty much right over it. And you're like, it doesn't even know I'm here.
Yeah. And you just go behind you then and catch it.
So anyway, again, jigs, sometimes I feel like a lot of people have difficulty getting confidence in them. Mm-hmm. They work. They're one of the most popular lures of all time, probably one of the most popular bass lures of all time. They obviously work. Yeah. It does take some confidence to actually catch fish on them. Mm-hmm. And I find maybe it's because they're bigger profile and you don't get as many bites on them.
Yeah.
Just put one in your hands and just go out fishing and just cast that jig. Just force yourself for one day to go out and get confidence in it, because it only takes one fish.
Yeah.
Until you're like, wow, that actually works. Right?
Yeah. And you learn real quick. Like with any technique that you're trying, as soon as you catch your first fish and then you're second on it, you start really dialing in how you fish that bait.
Yeah.
And that's how you're going to grow your success with it.
Exactly. So I thought we could go over some Texas rig baits that we've used and that we like. Again, we fish a lot of, super weedy, thick crap in the Kawarthas. And we're just talking mostly about like not flipping, but like pitching and punching baits that we like to use. Mm-hmm. So we talked a little bit about this last week, but one bait that we've really been enjoying is flipping a tube.
Yeah.
And I got here a pack of tubes. And this is actually the Strike King coffee tubes, which actually...
They wake you up in the morning. Don't hog it all. Come here.
Hey, it smells like coffee. If you've never smelled the Strike King coffee tubes, they literally smell like coffee. And apparently it attracts fish. I don't know. But this is just a 3.5-inch tube. You can rig that on an extra wide gap hook and whatever sinker you need to get through the slop. Tubes are really cool. They have a really, like we were mentioning last week, just a really random spiraling fall.
Yeah.
And if you're flipping around shallower cover around logs, Highly recommended. All right, here's another one. Talk about this.
A stick bait. This is from Limestone Lures. So stick baits, you can, like we talked about before, one of our favorite ways to rig stick baits is to Texas rig them. So you rig them just like you would any other of your flipping baits, and you can have these with a quick fall. They don't have to be weightless. You can, no problem if you want a slow fall, but you can punch with these. They're super streamlined.
Yeah.
So this is going to be one of your best baits for once you have this thing Texas rigged, for casting it into the thickest of weeds and retrieving it and being able to cast right again like 90% of the time without having to pick a weed off the top of the hook or something.
Yeah, and there's a lot of local guys that fish some of the Kawartha lakes, and if you watch their YouTube channels, they're fishing stick baits, but they're punching them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a good idea. It's not something that I personally had done before, but it works good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, yeah, so those are from Limestone Lures.
Yeah.
That's his 5-inch stick bait. Another very similar one, which I thought I'd give another shout out to another local company. I like to, support our local companies as much as we can. We met Vic at Kencast, who does Pro Water baits, and he has a very cool bait. I've never seen a bait. Not for a long time anyway. This is, I don't even know what this is called.
It's an old school bait.
Yeah, so it's basically a stick bait. It's called a paddle tail worm. It's a stick bait with a flat beaver tail tail. It's a beaver tail in the back. But feel that. It's nice and dense.
Oh, 100%. His plastics are like hardcore.
Yeah.
Oh, it's oily too.
Yeah. Smell that. It smells good. But
it smells good for something I want to bass to eat, not so much myself.
But it's just another perfect example of a simple bait that you can flip, pitch, and punch.
And the other thing too, I just wanted to talk about for his stuff there. The cool thing with these baits that he was explaining to us is you can trim that tail however you want. So you can get it to have a slightly different presentation when you're flipping it, or even if you're fishing a bit sparser weed, you have that thing tied on for flipping. You can then turn it into cut a V into the back on the side. You have a cut tail worm, and you can fish that thing back if you get them into a place that has a bit more sparse weeds. So that's a cool one if you want to stay more versatile in the boat.
Yeah, very cool. And just while we're on the topic of Pro Water baits, I thought we could go over some of these other cool baits. We just got these, so we haven't had time to fish them yet, but they look pretty cool.
I'm really excited for that one.
So Vic makes all of his baits are like custom molds.
Yeah.
And they're made in Ontario. Again, we're not going to go too much because he's not sponsoring this episode. But I'm excited because we're actually going on a fishing trip this weekend. We're going to be flipping. But this is called the Punch and Munch. It's just like a thick bait with 4 little thin tails on the side that kind of quiver. And then it's got like
finesse
tube jig skirt on the back.
Yeah.
But that to me, that's like the ultimate flipping bait right there.
For me, this is, especially if you don't have the special hooks or whatnot, or you don't know how to rig a tube for flipping, this is a perfect option because it's a solid bait up here, so you can just Texas rig it. You know exactly how to do that, and you still have all the tentacles from the tube on the back end. And like Jesse said, a couple of appendages, and all the appendages on this are very fine and finesse. So they're going to move with very little effort in that water.
This is pretty much like a solid tube jig.
I love it.
Yeah.
This thing is really
to me, and it's a perfect size.
Yep.
It's the perfect, to me, again, I haven't fished this, but I fish a lot of baits, but to me, I'd be very happy if someone was like, you know what, you can only fish one bait for largemouth flipping, and this is it.
It's the perfect mouthful.
Oh, sweet. Yeah. It's not too big. It's not too small. And they're all custom made. So fish haven't seen anything like this.
Yep.
Unless you're fishing a lake that I fished, and then it'll see it. But he makes all kind of really cool baits that are unique, and you can tell this guy fishes largemouth because a lot of his baits are just perfect largemouth baits.
I think Jesse said before when we were talking about Cancast after he had gone, he was saying his first time meeting him, and the guy's like, "Hey, you like fishing slop?" And Jesse's like, "Best friends."
Yeah, I was like, "Can we just become best friends?" All right. So a few other baits. So we kind of covered some local baits, stick baits, tube jigs, which are great. And another cool bait that I'm excited to flip, we mentioned this before, is the Bass Magnet Jelly Shad. Yeah. I don't think this was even designed to be flipped, but I honestly think it's going to flip very well. And I got this really cool June bug, purple color. And I'm gonna Texas rig that sideways and just flip that around.
A lot of guys like the beaver baits is a classic flipping bait, and it's or the creature baits. And I know you have a bunch sitting over there too.
Yeah,
but to have something that has just a nice thick profile instead of just something long and slender, you can still pull it out. Yeah, you might pick up a little bit of weed here on it, but it's easy to pick off because it's still Texas rigged. It's not wads of it on there.
Yeah,
but just a thicker presentation a thicker profile, could be the thing. Again, fish might not have seen something like that recently, or on that body of water, because people are trying to fish more streamlined baits, like
Exactly,
like
which are more
a
popular.
worm or a Senko or anything like that.
And generally, like if you're punching or fishing really thick cover, you're going to want to use something streamlined. But if you're fishing on lily pads or sparse cover or wood, you can get away with something a bit thicker. We're going to get into craws, which I think are probably one of the most popular baits to flip. And there's tons of craws on the market. You know, you got Strike King Rage Craws, one of the most popular ones. One of my favorite ones that I've been using since it came out is the Z-Man Helicraws.
Yeah.
And again, I like these because you can catch 40 to 50 bass off each one.
You super glue it onto your hook and it's not coming off all day.
When it comes to Z-Man, the Helicraws, it's a small compact shape. It's 3 3/4.
It's got a nice dense body to set the hook into.
Yep.
It even has the hook slot as well. So it will compress a bit really nicely as well onto the bottom of the hook as well.
You can use an EWG hook with these, but also you can use a straight shank. And oftentimes people say, oh, I don't like using straight shanks because when you set the hook, it tears the bait apart. Well, you don't have to worry about the bait tearing apart on a Z-Man because it literally is made of insane plastic that literally doesn't break. But that's a good craw. When it comes to punching, again, there's so many baits. Another one we'll quickly mention, another local company, and I've caught fish on these, is the True North Baits Brush Beetle.
Yep.
It's a pretty cool little bait. It has a fairly flat body, so I don't like using it with a straight shank. But look at that.
That's a really good example, because I was going to mention, you can have baits like creature baits, like a craw, and the ones that you want to use for pitching are ones that have directional appendages, I would say.
Yeah.
So you can get some craws where the claws almost come off like straight to the side. That can pick up some stuff where the legs or half the legs are pointing up and half the legs are pointing down the bait. Whereas something like this, you have your weight at the front of this bait, or the top here, and as it comes into the water, it's going weight first. It slides right to those weeds. Everything's coming that way. And as you pop it back out, everything's sliding right out of those weeds.
Yeah.
So something like that, it seems like a small thing, but if it helps you, pick 50% less weeds off your bait,
in heavy weeds,
it's going to be
it can
more
make
enjoyable
difference.
for fishing.
100%.
And you're going to have more efficient fishing.
And then one thing, the last bait we'll kind of talk about is for punching. It's always good to have something streamlined because you're literally pushing your bait through literal slop.
Yeah.
So you're going to want something streamlined. One bait that I picked up, it's Wham Baits, another local guy that makes baits. This is called the Wham Rocket, and it's very streamlined. Like,
I'm excited to be fishing this one. Yeah.
It's just like a tube body with 2 little wings on the side and just like 5 tentacles off the back. And it's so streamlined. It has a little bit of flapping, but not a lot.
Yeah.
The wings on the side, really, they'll push out of the way if it's trying to get through. You don't want to use something with any craw flappers or things that will hinder it from going down or actually catch weeds on the way down. You just want stuff that's extremely streamlined when you're punching so that it can just shoot down. The whole point is to get below the weeds to the canopy underneath. If your bait's literally getting caught on the way down, that's defeating the whole purpose. So if you are punching, make sure you're using something streamlined and enough weight to get down. But we're going to get into weight.
Yeah.
So that's basically for baits. Like, I feel like generally speaking, if you're using any bait you have confidence in, it could be a craw, it could be a stick bait, it could be a beaver. Oh, we didn't talk about beavers, so I'll talk about beavers quick.
Yeah.
And the main beaver that I use, there's tons of brands of beavers, like tons of them, is we like to use the Perfect Jig.
Yeah.
He has his
He
beavers.
does some nice ones.
I like these because they're not huge. They're kind of like a compact size.
Yes.
This color here, I don't think color matters as much as some people think. This color is called Bluegill Smash, and it looks just like a juvenile bluegill. It's like a kind of like a motor oily green pumpkin with all these different colors of like blue and green fleck in it. It literally looks like a sunfish. I've had really good days on this.
Yeah.
I don't know if it makes a difference, but I've had really good days. But the thing with the beaver is the appendages don't really do much. They're not flapping around like a craw. Mm-hmm. They pretty much just slide down, and it's more like just the glide as it goes down. So they're really good for that reaction bite. They don't do much on the way down, but sometimes the bass don't want a lot of action. In colder water, you're going to want to use something like that. Mm-hmm. Or if you're fishing faster and you don't want your bait to take forever to hit the bottom, you're going to want to use a beaver. They imitate anything. They imitate like a crayfish on the bottom. They can imitate a bluegill. Speaking of punching, we'll get into that quick. So we talked about the Wham Rocket. Another really good punching bait is the X-Zone Punisher Craw. And if you look, like Andrew said, it's chunky. It holds a straight shank because it's a fatter body. And all the appendages are streamlined. So they're all going to fold in as it goes through a small hole in the weeds. And we had a really good day on one of the Kawartha Lakes last year or the year before, I forget. And I was just fishing these, and they're small. They're only like 3.5 inches long. So anyway, there's tons of baits you can use. Again, like we said, use one that works for the situation you're fishing in and that you have confidence in. And when it comes to color, again, every time we talk about bass, we're talking, oh, what colors do you need? Again, green pumpkin, black and blue. Literally, I know you can get, like I said, oh, that bluegill smash color, that's cool. But that's pretty much just a variation of a green pumpkin.
Yeah. And you don't often see guys flipping bright colored baits. It's not as common as these darker colors when you're flipping, because you're fishing dark water. You're fishing places where, it's a bright sunny day, but you're underneath a mat that is cutting out 90%, 95%, 97% of the sunlight that's entering the water. Doesn't even reach below the surface because of these thick weeds.
You have to get through that to get into that separate world under there that you probably don't even know exists, because all you see is the top and you're like, oh, there's nothing underneath that. Believe me, there's a whole different world.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be that deep to hold fish, because all those weeds are taking away a lot of that sunlight. They have cover. They feel safe.
So anyway, we got to shoot through some of these quick, but I thought we talked about Texas rigs and some of the baits that we like. I thought we could just talk about jigs quick. Again, Texas rigs are great. They're super weedless. Jigs get bigger bites, and I find they're really good around wood and stuff.
Yes.
I like, if I'm fishing timber, I really like chucking a jig. Plus, jigs skip very well.
Yeah.
Not very well. Like if you can skip a jig a lot better than some flipping baits.
Yeah.
But anyway, when it comes to jigs, there's different kinds of jigs. There's archy head jigs, there's football jigs, there's swim jigs, there's different things. You're going to want a flipping jig. And it's just like the head design is designed to penetrate weeds better and not get hung up. There's also punching jigs. I know Perfect Jig makes a punching jig that I really like. And you can actually throw that thing in heavy cover and pull it out, and it comes back generally without anything on it.
Yeah.
There are head shapes that are better around weeds. And speaking of that, one of my favorite jigs for fishing around heavy cover, see if I can find it in my jig box. This is a Perfect Jig. This is one of my favorite jigs. This is the Perfect Jig tungsten jig.
Yeah.
This is a little 3/8. This is like a little finesse
nice
jig.
Yeah, the profile of that I really like too.
Yeah. So you don't always have to chuck a big jig, but generally I'm going to start at around 1/2 ounce. That's where I like to start. Although when you're using a punching jig, you may go up to 3/4 or even 1 ounce. Yeah. But in Ontario, I find if you have a bunch of jigs and you have 1/2 ounce and 3/4 ounce, you can fish a lot of things. Another jig that I did really well on last year, you remember, these are a bit of a bougie jig, is the empty jigs. And he makes
really well built too.
Oh, yeah. These are probably some of the best jigs you can buy. They're expensive, but treat yourself once in a while. Buy some nice jigs. He has these jigs, and these are called grass jigs. Notice how the head is more like an arrow. So it actually slides through weeds a lot better than a traditional rounder shaped jig head. And these are really good. And it has a
big flat bottom too. So once it hits bottom, it stands upright really nicely.
Yeah.
And because it's a larger surface area than like some other style jig heads, it is less likely, or is more likely to actually stay above the litter that's on the ground as well.
Jigs are great. We'll probably do a whole episode one of these days just about jig fishing, because it is a very...
We did one about swim jigs, so now we're going to do another one about flipping jigs.
Jigs, but I'd say if you're looking to get started fishing jigs, or maybe you don't have a lot of confidence, just go to the store and buy maybe a 1/2 ounce black and blue.
Yep.
And put whatever trailer. One trailer that we like is the Perfect Jig chunk. A classic chunk trailer is great.
In all the books growing up, or the old fishing shows, like the classic is like, you hear the guys talking about, a jig and a pig, and a pig. And that's because they used to be made with pork rinds.
Yep.
So
they still have those. Not as popular because the plastic is very good and has a lot of natural, or not natural scent, but like artificial scent added to it.
So jig and a pig is, despite being classic, still works really well. And it also will extend the profile of that bait out more, so you can get a
bigger profile.
Big profile if you hook it just once through the center of that chunk.
Definitely. So we talked a little bit about weight for jigs, starting at 1/2 ounce, 5/8, 3/4. Same with Texas rigs. Generally, it depends on what you're doing. If you're trying to get that reaction bite where the bait's shooting down fast, I generally start. If I'm not fishing thick cover, I'm going to start at like 3/8 or half. And then if I find my bait's not going down, a lot of baits like that have a lot of action, they actually slow down. So you have to put a bigger weight on. So I'll generally start at 1/2 ounce, and then I'll go up from there. If I'm fishing shallow water and I'm trying to, slow down, I might only use 1/8 or 1/4 of an ounce. Now, when I'm punching, I generally start at 3/4. And that sounds heavy. And I'll oftentimes, generally, especially after July, I'll go up to 1 ounce.
Yeah.
In Florida, they'll go up to past 2 ounces of weight. I start at 3/4, and if I flip my bait out and it doesn't go through the slop fast enough, or it gets hung up on the surface, I always go up to 1 ounce.
You have to.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you can't fish the slop.
Yeah. So don't be shy in using bigger weights. You might think, oh, this is Ontario. We don't have slop. You might not have slop on your lake, but if you do, don't be shy to put on a big 1 ounce or even 1.25 ounce weight to get through, because you're only catching fish if you get through. And if you're being very ineffective, if you pitch out 10 times and your bait only goes through twice, put on a bigger weight. Another way you can do it, I see a lot of guys, they'll flip really high in the air, the pitch really high in the air, so that the bait has some momentum that it actually shoots through.
Yep.
You can try that too. I generally just like to use.
You'll often lose, unless you're skilled, you'll lose accuracy doing it that way.
Yeah.
Just because you're flinging this thing way up in the air.
Exactly. I thought we'd cover quick just hook sets.
Yeah.
Because that's something that I struggled with for a long time. I know we mentioned this on a few podcasts, that bass hold on to a jig or a plastic bait way longer generally than you think.
Than any other bait, I would say. They hold on to a jig longer than they will a drop shot or a frog, and these are things that they'll hold on to, or a Senko. Like, they'll hold on to a jig. Because I think I talked about it before, my first jig fish, I cast out, wasn't even looking, and I swear, like, a few seconds went by, not like 2 or 3, like
10.
5 to 10, and I'm like, why is my line 30 feet away from where I cast it? I'm like, oh, it must be a fish. Reel in, and the thing, I just reeled in the slack, and the fish was there. Like, it carried that bait all the way over.
Yeah.
So they hold on to, like, flipped baits or jigs a long time.
So if you're fishing and you flip your bait in, generally, like Andrew said before, sometimes if there's a fish right in that spot, it'll hit it as soon as the bait hits the water.
Or he'll see a wake come across to meet it as it enters.
Yeah, I've had that happen.
Yeah.
So when that happens, your heart might just start pounding. Don't set the hook immediately.
Yeah.
Get yourself ready, reel in the slack line till you feel the fish.
Wait for weight.
And then once you feel that weight, don't slackline them. That's what I used to do when I lose a lot of fish. Slacklining is when you don't feel the weight of the fish and you just set the hook.
Yeah.
Feel the weight of the fish and then pull back on your rod really hard. That's what I find works good. Hooks are sharp, braided line doesn't stretch, and rods are really good these days. If you pull back on a fish, you don't have to set the hook really hard. If you pull back really hard on a heavy or an extra heavy rod, believe me, that hook is going to find its place in there. If you slackline them, sometimes the hook doesn't have it's not in the fish and it just pops right out. It blows out of their mouth.
Yeah. It comes out so fast. So it has the weed guard on those jigs. And if you pull it out really heavy or really, really quick, the tungsten or the lead head will open that mouth a bit, and that weed guard, and it can just skip right out because it has momentum of skipping that mouth open. Whereas a slow pull, it might just think that something is struggling, and that bass will just bite down again on it.
Yeah.
Or bite harder. It's trying to keep its mouth closed. It doesn't want to lose what it just ate.
You have to think, if they eat a bluegill and the thing's kicking around in its mouth before it swallows it, it's not going to spit it out. It's going to try to hold it in. So when you have a jig, you can actually pull on the fish a bit and it won't let go, believe me. So then,
and that'll help it
get yourself ready for a good hook set
in the mouth.
You don't have to just maybe when you pitch your bait in and the fish grabs it, your rod's up in the air. You're not in a good position for a hook set. Just calm down, reel in the slack.
If you want to test this theory, have your friend with a rod and a flipping jig, and just have the jig softly in your hand and have them set the hook real hard, and you'll see that it'll actually pop your hand out. I'm just kidding. Don't do that.
Don't do that. So anyway, I thought we could touch about hooks real quick. There's 2 different styles of hooks for flipping Texas rigs, and one is EWG extra wide gap, and then one is straight shank. And it depends. Some people like one, some people like the other. I love straight shank hooks. I find that I get the best penetration with them because it has such a wide gap. I do find though that you do lose a lot of fish on them because there's no bend in the hook. Like EWG is kind of like lock in the fish's mouth when you hook them. So I can see both sides of it. If I'm punching, I'm always using a straight shank. If I'm flipping, I'll generally use an EWG, an extra wide gap. I find the EWGs are a little bit more versatile and they don't destroy your bait as much. Usually on a straight shank, when you jack a good hook set onto a fish, oftentimes the bait just rips off.
Yeah.
So it's not the best. That being said, a big wide gap straight shank, when you set the hook, it just goes straight into the fish's mouth.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's better in a more vertical, like punching and flipping close. But anytime you're casting farther, an EWG is probably your better bet.
And see what works best for yourself, because Jesse and I, like we've said many times, we have slightly different ways we fish. I generally have a bit more patience when it comes to my presentation, but also I'm pretty good at waiting and just waiting to feel for the weight of that fish. So I don't have an issue a lot of the time fishing an EWG. I have a really good hookup ratio with them. Yeah. Whereas I know Jesse, his hookup ratio increased when he went to straight shank. I didn't notice a difference. In fact, I found I had better with my EWG just because I'm slowly reeling it in. I'm waiting to feel that hook start to penetrate, and then I can go.
Yeah.
So judging by your fishing style, try both. See what works better for you, because it might just be a simple change of hook, and you're going to produce more.
Yeah. And again, like Andrew said, there's some people that are hardcore EWG, and there's some people that are like, I'll only flip straight shank. And whatever works for you, if it's working, don't change it. Believe me. Yeah. So anyway, the last thing we're going to quickly go over, we always go over gear. Again, if you fish slot before, you probably already know what gear you like. But we're going to talk quick about gear because some people ask for this every episode. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about gear. So I brought my flipping rod, and this is a 7.3 heavy. Now, the cool thing about this rod is it's not a fast action. It's a mod fast, which means it has a little bit more bend to it. I really like a more parabolic flipping rod. This is St. Croix's Victory 7.3 heavy mod fast. This is actually their flipping rod. Now, most times when you think of a flipping rod, it's 7.5 or even longer. I prefer the shorter ones. They're better for pitching. You're more accurate. And I'm fishing in a small boat. So any rod generally longer than 7.3, it's harder to use in a small boat like a canoe or a small tinner. So don't be afraid to use a slightly shorter rod. You can pitch, you can skip, you can do all kinds of stuff with it. And I punch with rods this short too, and I have no problem with it.
When flipping was invented, 7-foot rods were not invented.
Yeah.
Not for bass, at least.
Exactly. So you can flip with a medium heavy, but we're talking about fishing heavy cover this episode. So generally speaking, you're going to want a heavy or an extra heavies. If I'm punching, I actually own a 7.5 extra heavy, loaded up with 50 or 65 pound braid, and I'm using 1 ounce weights, and it has nothing to do with the size of the fish.
Yeah.
It's all about getting the fish out of the crap.
Where you're fishing. It's the rod. You change your rod and your gear based on how you have to fish. It's where you're fishing and what tackle you're throwing yourself.
Exactly. But overall, if I could only have one rod, I'd have this 7.3 heavy, and I have a Corrado K 8.5-1. I like a fast reel because I like to pitch in, jiggle, pull out, pitch again, jiggle. That's it. I don't want to be fishing a slow reel. And again, I have 40 or 50 pound braid on that. That's all you need. You can literally fish 95% of the slop. There are times when I'm like, oh, I wish I had my extra heavy if I'm fishing like super heavy stuff. But it's generally, you don't have to worry about an extra heavy. Depends on it depends on the rod too, but you're going to want at least a heavy.
Yeah.
And 40 to 50 pound braid.
Like for most of the stuff that we have around here in Ontario, a heavy is going to do it for you. However, the one lake that we fish, 100%, if I lived in that lake and I fished it all the time, I would own an extra heavy for those areas just because it's going to be more beneficial because it's pretty thick.
And another thing to add is if you fish in a canoe or a kayak, especially a canoe or a kayak, you lose so much hook setting power when you set the hook because your boat actually moves when you set the hook. People in bigger boats don't understand this, but when I set the hook in my canoe, I actually move my boat. So you actually lose a lot of power. So what I did was I bought an extra heavy.
Yep.
And I noticed that when I'm fishing in, it's my punching rod. So when I'm punching and fishing in heavy slop, I can crack a good hook set and actually get a good hook set. There's some slippage involved when you set the hook in your whole kayak or your canoe moves. So, but anyway, that's just a very brief. One of these days we're going to have like an intense breakdown on equipment because I've had people ask for that, but we're already going over time. So we're just going to talk quickly about our giveaway again because this is a really cool giveaway. So Slim's Lures bait molds, as we mentioned, they're open pore molds, and he's giving away 8.
That's crazy.
That's crazy. Like he's like, how much do I have to give away for a giveaway? And I was just like, well, whatever. And he's like, how about this? And he sends me this list of molds, and I'm like, wow, that's a lot. It's actually, it's over $170 worth of value, and I'm pretty sure that's US. So that's like $400 Canadian. But anyway,
and the cool thing is these molds, they're not just like one bait. Some of them are, I think, of the open pores, but the Goby, for example, that has 4?
Yep.
4 different baits.
So you pour 4 at the same time.
A lot of the bigger open pores that I've seen before, it's for one bait.
Yeah.
So especially if you are wanting to make like a few packages to, share with your friends, or you want to see if you can get into bait manufacturing, these are nice because you can pour, a 4 bait pack. There's a pack of baits right there in one pour.
Yeah.
So they are nice. They're like legit. They're not just
sick.
Yeah.
And I'll describe the molds that he's giving away. And again, we'll put pictures of this up on our social media, so definitely check that out. So he's giving away, it's a 2 5/8 of an inch Smalley snack mold, which is the Goby mold, which is pretty sick. He's got a 4 1/8 inch minnow mold.
The minnow mold is really cool.
Yeah, it looks good. Then he has what he calls Slim's Original Craw. The craw bait looks sick. It's really cool.
That looks, yeah.
And he has
want some.
a 3 1/2 inch and a 4 inch. So you get 2. And he has one called a mean bug, which is cool. And then he has these 2 worms, which look pretty, it's just like a finesse worm. They look really good. He has a 4 inch and a 6 inch. And that 4 inch worm to me, it's like drop shot, like that 100%. Yeah. And then he has one called the mini raptor, which is really cool. I'll put these pictures up. I can't even describe half of them because they're so cool. They're very detailed. It's not like a bait you'd find at the tackle store. Like these look like, well, they're all custom made. They look really
If you want
sick.
Something different, this is what you do.
Yeah. So we're really excited about this. I mean, again, Andrew might enter under some false name so he can win, but it's a really cool giveaway.
Do that.
So again, we'd like to thank Noah for that. That's an awesome giveaway, and we'd like to thank Noah for being our first giveaway from
across
America,
the border.
Across the border, yeah. So anyway, we'd like to thank you for that. So we are at episode 22, so we're excited to hit episode 25 coming up. Our goal was actually to hit 10. Without failing.
And we smashed it.
Yeah, we're coming up on 25. The interaction and the feedback we've had has been absolutely fantastic.
Yes.
And we'd like to thank everyone for all the reviews. We have, at this time, almost 100 reviews on Spotify and tons of them on Apple. Yep. Lots of really good written reviews, too, on Apple. So
keep them coming. We do read them.
Yeah.
And most importantly, other people read them, too.
Yeah.
So that helps us out a lot to do that.
We really appreciate it. And as this podcast grows, again, like we said, we hopefully will be able to attract more awesome sponsors like Noah Clark and get more prizes into your guys' hands. So definitely thanks for that. We'd also like to mention that we do have a Patreon set up. We have a few Patreon members already that are helping us to slowly chip away at our monthly expenses. And again, completely voluntary. If you would like to help us chip away slowly at some of the expenses, that would be great.
It's like buying us a coffee.
Yeah. But,
or a pack of coffee tubes.
Yeah. Stay tuned for next week, episode 23, and we're not actually going to ruin it for you because it's a really cool episode that we don't want to ruin the surprise for.
That's because we don't know what the topic is yet.
Oh, I do. Do you? So anyway, thanks for listening. We will see you next week.